The afternoon moved quietly around the abandoned circus grounds, where canvas once stretched wide and bright but now lay folded and brittle, half buried in dust. Wind passed through torn seams and broken poles, lifting dry strands of straw and carrying them in slow, uncertain spirals. It was there, behind the collapsed structure and rusted cages, that the sound first rose, low, uneven, almost mistaken for the shifting of debris. Rangers paused in their routine movements, sensing something out of place. It was not a cry that demanded immediate alarm, but a fragile rhythm of breath and strain, repeated softly against the hollow air. Following it with careful steps, they found the lion resting within a narrow enclosure layered with old straw, his massive body stretched on its side, ribs lifting faintly, then falling with effort. His mane, once brushed and shaped for performances, now lay tangled and dusty, woven with bits of grass and fabric thread. One foreleg twitched now and then, not in strength but in response to distant discomfort. His eyes remained mostly closed, lids fluttering briefly when shadows crossed his face. Each breath seemed borrowed, drawn in slowly and released with a thin vibration. The ground beneath him held the impression of long stillness, flattened by days of unmoving weight. Flies gathered and drifted away again, sensing weakness but never lingering long. The air carried the scent of dry earth, old metal, and something faintly medicinal from supplies left behind. No chain restrained him anymore, yet he did not attempt to rise. His strength, once obvious in every step, now rested only in memory. The team approached without sound, boots placed carefully between scattered boards and torn ropes. They knelt several paces away, observing before intervening, watching the rise of his chest, the slow tightening of his jaw, the occasional tightening of muscles that suggested discomfort rather than aggression. One ranger murmured, barely above breath, "It's okay, boy." The words were not meant to command, only to settle the space. Another slowly set down a medical kit, its zipper opened inch by inch to avoid sharp noise. Their movements remained deliberate, shaped by long practice and patience. No hands reached out yet. They waited for his breathing to steady, for the faint flicker of his ear to acknowledge their presence without fear. A soft breeze moved across the enclosure, lifting loose strands of mane and shifting the straw around his flank. Somewhere beyond the tents, distant birds passed overhead, their calls brief and indifferent. The lion released a long, trembling breath and settled again, his body adjusting by inches. The humans remained where they were, steady as stones, allowing the moment to unfold in its own time. Sunlight filtered through torn canvas and settled gently across his shoulder, warming the dust along his fur. In that quiet frame of light and breath, between decay and care, the world seemed to pause, holding space for something fragile to begin. Morning returned to the abandoned grounds with pale light and thin mist rising from the earth, softening the sharp outlines of broken fences and collapsed tents. Each day at nearly the same hour, the man walked the familiar path through scattered debris, carrying 2 small containers of water and a folded cloth. His pace never changed. He did not hurry and he did not linger. His footsteps remained quiet, measured against the loose gravel and dry straw, as if he were entering a space that belonged to something far more delicate than himself. The air still held the coolness of night, mixed with the faint scent of rust and fading canvas, and the world seemed to breathe slowly as he approached the enclosure. The lion lay where he had been before, his massive form pressed into the flattened straw, his body curved slightly inward as if conserving what little strength remained. His eyes opened partway when the man appeared, dark pupils following each movement without lifting his head. They did not hold fear nor welcome, only alert attention shaped by long uncertainty. His breathing came in shallow waves, sometimes steady, sometimes briefly interrupted by faint tremors along his ribs. A slow tightening passed through his shoulders when the man knelt nearby, then eased when no sudden motion followed. One paw shifted by a few inches, claws flexing weakly against the ground before relaxing again. The man placed the water containers beside him, unscrewing the lids with slow, controlled turns. He poured a small amount into a shallow dish and slid it forward inch by inch, stopping well before it reached the lion's muzzle. The sound of liquid settling was soft, barely audible over the breeze. "Easy now," he murmured, more to the moment than to the animal. His voice carried no expectation. It was simply present, like the light filtering through torn fabric overhead. He remained seated, hands resting loosely on his knees, allowing space to remain untouched. For several minutes nothing changed. Dust drifted lazily through slanted sunlight. A strip of canvas fluttered once and fell silent again. The lion's nostrils flared faintly as he drew in the scent of water, and his lower jaw loosened just enough to release a quiet breath. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his neck extended forward. It was not a full movement, only a subtle adjustment, guided by instinct and careful restraint. His tongue touched the surface of the water once, then withdrew. After a pause, it returned, tracing small ripples across the dish. Each sip was separated by long stillness, as though he needed to rest between attempts. Pain remained visible in the way his muscles tightened after each movement, in the slight tremor that passed along his spine before settling. Yet awareness lived beside it. His ears rotated gently toward distant sounds. His gaze followed drifting shadows. When a bird passed overhead, he lifted his head a fraction, then lowered it again, conserving energy. The man watched without interrupting, offering only quiet presence. At one point, barely louder than breath, he whispered, "You're doing good." By the time the sun rose higher, warming the enclosure and drying the mist from broken beams, the water dish stood half empty. The lion rested again, chest moving in steadier rhythm than before. Around them, grass stirred beyond the fence line, bending softly in the breeze. Light slid across dust and fur alike, settling into a calm, patient stillness that held both endurance and fragile promise. The afternoon unfolded slowly, stretched thin by heat and quiet. Sunlight filtered through torn canvas and broken beams, falling in uneven bands across the enclosure. Dust hovered in the air, suspended as if time itself had slowed to accommodate the stillness. The man remained nearby, seated on a low crate several paces away, his posture relaxed but attentive, hands resting loosely in his lap. He had been there for hours, shifting only when circulation demanded it, rising briefly to adjust his position before settling again. No tools lay open beside him now. No water dish waited to be filled. This was not a moment for action. It was a moment for presence. The lion had not moved since late morning. His body lay stretched along the straw, one flank rising and falling in a shallow, uneven rhythm. Heat gathered in his mane, darkening it with faint traces of sweat and dust. Small insects drifted nearby and then vanished. Occasionally his tail twitched once, then fell still. His eyes remained half open, unfocused at times, then sharpening briefly when shadows shifted. Pain held his muscles in quiet restraint, keeping him grounded, conserving what little strength remained. Yet awareness lingered beneath it, alert and listening. Somewhere beyond the tents, wind passed through tall grass, producing a soft, wavering sound. A loose strip of canvas stirred overhead, brushing lightly against a rusted pole before settling again. The man glanced toward the movement, then returned his gaze to the lion, careful not to stare too directly. He understood the fragile balance of attention and distance. Too much focus could feel like pressure. Too little could feel like absence. So he held himself in between, steady and unassuming. It happened without warning. There was no sudden tension, no dramatic shift. The lion's neck tightened almost invisibly, muscles drawing inward as if gathering courage from somewhere deep within. His head lifted a few centimeters, then paused. A faint tremor passed through his jaw. He released a slow breath and lifted again, this time higher, until his chin cleared the straw. The movement was fragile, shaped by effort and restraint. His ears angled forward, then relaxed. His eyes, now fully open, found the man. For a brief moment, neither moved. The man felt his breathing change before he noticed it. He slowed it deliberately, matching the rhythm he saw in the lion's chest. He did not lean forward. He did not reach out. He simply remained where he was, allowing the space between them to exist untouched. "That's it," he whispered, so softly it barely disturbed the air. The lion held his head upright, muscles trembling slightly under the strain. His gaze did not challenge. It did not retreat. It rested, cautious and searching, shaped by years of confinement and recent days of quiet care. His pupils adjusted to the light, narrowing slightly as sunlight touched his face. A low sound escaped his throat, not a roar, not a warning, but a brief vibration that faded almost as soon as it formed. The moment stretched, delicate and unspoken. It carried no promise and no demand. It simply existed, suspended between breath and light. After several seconds, the lion slowly lowered his head back onto the straw, settling carefully into rest. Yet something had shifted. His breathing steadied. His body relaxed by small degrees. Late in the afternoon, as shadows lengthened and warmth softened into gentle gold, grass beyond the fence leaned and whispered in the breeze. Dust drifted lazily through fading sunlight. The man remained seated, watching quietly, while the lion rested with his head turned slightly in his direction, eyes half closed, holding on to something fragile and new. The following morning arrived with softer light and cooler air, carrying the distant scent of damp soil and early grass. The grounds felt quieter than usual, as if even the broken structures and rusted frames were holding their breath. The man walked in alongside a small team this time, their movements synchronized by shared understanding rather than spoken instruction. Between them, they carried a compact medical case and a folded blanket, its edges worn from years of careful use. No voices rose above a murmur. No footsteps hurried. Everything unfolded with deliberate restraint. The lion remained where he had rested overnight, his body curled slightly inward, his mane flattened against the straw. When he sensed the unfamiliar presence, his eyes opened wider than usual, tracking each figure as they approached. His breathing tightened briefly, then slowed again when no sudden gestures followed. The veterinarian knelt first, lowering herself gradually until she was at his level. She paused there, allowing her presence to settle into the space before reaching for anything. "Easy boy," she murmured, her voice barely louder than the breeze moving through torn canvas. The examination began without force. A light cloth was placed near his face to soften the glare of the rising sun. The man remained beside her, close enough to offer support, far enough to preserve space. One hand moved slowly along the lion's shoulder, fingers pressing gently into muscle that had once been firm and powerful. Now it yielded too easily, revealing deep fatigue beneath thinning fur. The lion released a low, uneven breath, his body tightening briefly before relaxing again when no pain followed. The veterinarian listened first, placing a small instrument against his rib cage, waiting patiently for his breathing to settle. Each shallow inhale carried faint strain, each exhale ended in a soft tremor. She shifted her position inch by inch, tracing the rhythm of his heart, the subtle irregularities hidden beneath layers of mane and skin. Her brow tightened slightly, not in alarm but in recognition. She continued, feeling along his abdomen, noting areas of tension, subtle swelling, and the way he flinched almost imperceptibly beneath her touch. When she reached his throat and jaw, the source of his earlier cries became clearer. Her fingers paused, then moved more carefully, exploring swollen tissue and hardened knots beneath the surface. The lion responded with a quiet vibration in his chest, a sound shaped by discomfort rather than aggression. "I know," she whispered, more reflex than intention. The team exchanged brief glances, silent communication shaped by experience. Years of neglect and improper feeding had left lasting damage. Internal inflammation, untreated infection, and slow organ failure had been building for months, hidden beneath outward stillness. His body had been fighting quietly, long after strength was gone. The low sounds he made were not calls for attention, but involuntary responses to pain moving through fragile systems. Care shifted immediately, though nothing about it became hurried. Medication was prepared with measured precision. Fluids were warmed and positioned carefully. Soft padding was placed beneath strained joints. Every adjustment respected the limits of his endurance. When a small needle touched his skin, the man whispered, "Almost done," and the lion remained still, eyes half closed, trusting the unfamiliar sensations. By late morning, sunlight filtered warmly across the enclosure, illuminating calm, coordinated movements. The veterinarian recorded notes while watching his breathing settle into a gentler rhythm. Outside the fence, tall grass swayed slowly, bending with the wind and rising again. Within that fragile space of dust, fur, and quiet determination, Care had found its focus, steady, precise, and shaped by deep respect for a life that had endured more than it ever should have. Weeks passed without ceremony. They unfolded through quiet mornings, measured treatments, slow walks around the enclosure, and long hours of still companionship. The broken circus grounds changed almost without anyone noticing. Grass pushed through cracks in concrete. Vines climbed rusted bars. Canvas fragments faded further into pale, fragile fabric. And within that shifting landscape, the lion's body began to respond, not with sudden transformation, but with small, steady returns to balance. On this morning, light arrived clear and open, unfiltered by mist or cloud. The sky stretched wide above the enclosure, pale blue and patient. The fence gate stood open for the first time, secured to the side, no longer forming a narrow boundary. Beyond them lay a protected stretch of land where grasses moved freely and trees offered shade without confinement. The air carried the scent of warm soil and distant leaves. The lion stood near the threshold, his weight balanced evenly across all four legs. His posture was no longer folded inward. His spine held itself with quiet strength. Scars and thinning patches of fur remained, reminders of long neglect, but beneath them muscle had returned. His breathing was deep and unbroken, rising and falling without effort. When he shifted, it was with purpose, not caution. The man stood several paces behind, hands loosely at his sides. He had removed his jacket and laid it on a nearby crate, as if shedding any trace of authority. The veterinarian and 2 rangers remained farther back, forming no line, no barrier, only a loose presence shaped by respect. No one held equipment. No one prepared to intervene. The lion lifted his head and tested the air, drawing in unfamiliar scents carried from beyond the enclosure. His ears turned toward distant birds. His tail moved once, slow and relaxed. He took 1 step forward, then another, each movement deliberate and unforced. When his paws touched the open ground beyond the gate, he paused, muscles tightening briefly as if checking his own balance, then easing again. The man whispered almost to himself, "Go on." The words dissolved into the wind. The lion continued. He walked several meters into the open space and stopped, standing beneath uninterrupted sky. Sunlight touched his mane, revealing subtle gold beneath layers of dust and age. He turned his head once, glancing back, not in hesitation, but in quiet awareness of what had been left behind. No sound followed. No gesture reached for him. The humans remained still, allowing the moment to belong entirely to him. After a while, he lowered himself to the grass and rested there, chest rising steadily, eyes half closed in calm alertness. Insects drifted through the air. Leaves shifted overhead. Somewhere in the distance, another animal moved unseen. The team began to step away one by one, their footsteps soft, their departure unannounced. No marker remained. No claim was made. Only memory lingered, of breath returning, of trust built slowly, of care offered without demand. As evening approached, sunlight softened into amber and stretched long shadows across the field. Wind moved gently through tall grass, setting it into slow, whispering waves. Beneath that quiet sky, the lion rose and walked deeper into the open land, his figure gradually blending with light, movement, and life continuing on its own steady rhythm.